The paradox of early comparative literature. What is the paradox? The term comparative literature appeared in an age of transition in Europe as nations struggled for independence from the Ottoman Empire, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from France and Russia. These are the things that was that is also how does comparative literature was perceived in Europe, Asia, Africa. Please come in. Okay, don't shut the gate, please. Others will come.
History people important?
A little bit history, but একটু extension. সেখানে যখন বিভিন্ন কান্ট্রিগুলো এসব এম্পায়ার থেকে, যেসব সাম্রাজ্য থেকে যখন স্বাধীনতা লাভ করছিল, তখন তাদের মধ্যে সাহিত্যের যে পরিচিতি সেটা তারা লাভ করতে চাচ্ছিল। সেটা কি? In Europe, the nations were struggling to get their identity. Why? That means Ottoman Empire, that was consisted, you know that Ottoman Empire founded in 1299 by the Muslim Turks, once ruled over countries like Egypt, Greece, Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, Macedonia, Hungary, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, section of Arabian Peninsula, and even the part of North Africa. That Ottoman Empire covered so many countries. Okay, and that Ottoman Empire started a journey in 1299. In Europe and Africa, they were trying to get out of this country. They were getting independence, and they were trying to have their identity. What is their literary identity? What is their literature? What is their culture? What is their language? The Ottoman Empire officially ended in 1922, when the title of Ottoman Sultan was eliminated. So 1299, from 1299 to 1922, that is Ottoman Sultan was ended. Turkey was declared a republic on October 29, and Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, an army officer, founded the independent republic Turkey. That was the history of Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire sided with Germany in the First World War, and the post-war treaties dissolved the empire, and in 1922 the Sultanate was abolished by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who proclaimed the Republic of Turkey. So one of that empire, that is Ottoman, great empire, so many countries were included in Ottoman Empire. After that, Austro-Hungarian Empire, okay? Austro-Hungarian Empire, Australia-Hungary, Austro-Hungarian Empire, formerly monarchy, central in Europe. Austria-Hungary at one time included in Australia, Hungary, Bohemia, Moravia, Bukovina, thus Transylvania, Carniola. At that time, that was named. Previous next time, they got different name. Croatia. These are the countries, and countries that existed in 2019 that were once part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, that is Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Bosnia, Croatia. Okay, these were the part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. And apart from that, the France. যেগুলো লিঙ্ক দেওয়া হয়েছে সেগুলো আগের ব্যাচের অনেক ক্লাস হচ্ছে দেওয়া হচ্ছে, সেগুলো ফ্রি টাইমে আপনারা দেখে নিতে পারেন। ওকে, ফ্রান্স at the time, at that in due time you have to go.
Sorry,
Yes, হবে 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 France at the time about 480 colonies. And throughout its history, the second most colonies in the world behind the British Empire. British Empire, they had many colonies, and after British colonies, we get France, they have 80 colonies. Around 34 countries gained independence in France throughout the history, and the second most in the world behind the British Empire. And also Russia, Soviet Union, formerly Northern Eurasian Empire, is stretching from the Baltic and the Black Seas to the Pacific Ocean and its final years, consisting of 15 Soviet Socialist republics, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarusia, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan. These are the countries included in Russia. So Russia, France, Ottoman Empire, and also Austro-Hungarian Empire. Many countries were included under their role. Which role? That is Ottoman Empire, then Austro-Hungarian Empire, France, Russia. Okay. In the beginning of 20th century, these countries were getting independence. So whenever a new country will come in existence, they will try to have their identity. Okay. An identity in which what would be the integral part of our country's identity? That is literature, language, and culture. And that is the linkage between comparative literature and the history of literary and cultural background of a country. So previously this country were included in a great empire like Austro-Hungarian Empire and others. Okay, and they were getting independence and they are trying to pinpoint their own identity. That is their concern. Lord Macaulay consigned Indian and Arabian literature are not significant, that we have taught. Macaulay, that means these are the great empire, especially the European, the Western countries, especially the European, they said that their literature is the best, and Indian and African literature are not significant. Okay, that is what a type of, that we can call the post-colonial attitude. That means once upon a time these countries were ruled by the European countries, so they thought that our literature and culture is the best. Okay. In the same way, Shal had an absolute belief in the superiority of his own culture. Both Macaulay and Shal, they had a different idea. That means their culture and literature is best and other culture and literature is less significant. And both Macaulay and Shal were the product of the Europe of their time. As I have said, যেহেতু ইউরোপিয়ান এই কান্ট্রিগুলো বিভিন্ন দেশকে শাসন করেছিল, বিশেষ করে এশিয়ান এবং আফ্রিকান কান্ট্রিগুলোর, এই জন্য তারা ভাবতো যে তাদের কান্ট্রিজ লিটারেচার, কালচার, ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ সব দিক দিয়ে তারা হলো বেস্ট, এবং অন্যগুলো হচ্ছে, এবং স্পেশালি লর্ড ম্যাকলে অ্যান্ড শাল, দে হ্যাড দ্যাট চুয়াভিনিস্টিক আইডিয়া। চুয়াভিনিজম আমরা জানি এক্সেসিভ প্যাট্রিয়টিজম, নিজের দেশকে অনেক বেশি ভালোবাসার যে অ্যাটিটিউড, সেটাকে বলা হয় এক্সেসিভ প্যাট্রিয়টিজম। এক্সেসিভ প্যাট্রিয়ট, পুট ইউর মোবাইল ফোন ইন ব্যাক প্লেস, ব্যাগে রাখেন, ব্যাকে। Okay, so Macaulay and Shal, they had the excessive patriotism. They had that our country is best, our literature is best, our language is best, and other, in especially Asian and African literature, are less significant. এবং তারা বলছে not significant. They recognize that interrelatedness of European literary system. Shal termed is the part of their nations, the grand civilizing movement. So their civilization is best and the other civilization is not good. Okay. He perceived that the literature came from outside Europe are alien, you know, we know the alien, that means we can't perceive. Alien can be compared with a human being, but they will have the characteristics of the common human being. So in terms of literature, Shal and Macaulay, they said that their literature can be compared with alien. They are not exactly literature. They think like literature, they can see like literature, but they are not exact literature. And greatest remark about world literature need to be seen in context. Eventually he turned his attention to the literature beyond Europe and the word literature. The spelling is a bit tricky world literature, related his views that ended the war between Europe and the other parts of this world. So Goethe's comment also, that is also can be compared with Schall and Lord Macaulay. He also said that means our literature, that means Goethe also a part of European countries product, and he thought that, is there anybody? So he said Lord Macaulay's attitude when consigned Indian and Arabian literature as the scrap heap was not like Schall, but too bad absolute belief in the superiority of their own culture and literature. So Lord Macaulay, Schall and Goethe, they thought that their literature is first. When this attitude came in the history of a comparative literature, when these countries were coming out from Ottoman Empire and also Austro-Hungarian Empire, France, Russia, তারা স্বাধীনতা লাভ করছে এবং সেই সময় প্রত্যেকটা দেশ চাচ্ছে তার দেশের সাহিত্য এবং সংস্কৃতিকে সামনে নিয়ে যাওয়ার জন্য, সেরকম সেই সময় লর্ড ম্যাকলে এবং তারা বলছে যে এই লিটারেচারগুলো আসলে প্রকৃত লিটারেচার না, দে ক্যান বি কম্পেয়ার্ড উইথ এলিয়ান লিটারেচার. Okay, that alien. So comparative literature, without having clear ideas about what it was, what is the advantage of retrospection, we can see that comparative was a set against national, and was the study of the national literature risk acquisition of the partnership. The study in comparative literature carried with it a sense of transcendent of narrowly nationalistic. So what is the benefit of studying comparative literature then? So when that is the attitude, একদিকে যেমন শাল মেকুল্লে তারা বলছে comparative literature হচ্ছে তাদের এশিয়ান and আফ্রিকান লিটারেচার হলো ভালো না, not exactly to the mark. At that time their country were trying to, that means other country যেমন হাঙ্গেরি, যারা অটোমান এম্পায়ার থেকে স্বাধীনতা লাভ করছিল, তারা তাদের সাহিত্যকে যখন সামনে নিয়ে আসতে চাচ্ছে, তখন comparative literature, with the study of the comparative literature we can get the narrow nationalistic view, we can overcome, transcend means overcome the narrowly nationalistic attitude. Narrowly nationalistic attitudes মানে আমার নেশনটা হলো বেস্ট, এই যে ইউরোপের মধ্যে যে কালচার অ্যাটিটিউড, এটাকে ওভারকাম করছে এই কম্পারেটিভ লিটারেচারের স্টাডি দিয়ে. যখন কম্পারেটিভ লিটারেচার আমরা স্টাডি করছি তখন সবাই বলছে যে ইয়েস, প্রত্যেক লিটারেচার কোনোটাই বেস্ট না, কোনোটাই বেটার না, প্রত্যেক দেশেরই নিজস্ব সাহিত্য সংস্কৃতি আছে. That is the concern, that is the paradox of early comparative literature. Okay, and we have to go forward over there. Ulrich Westin says that Jacques Empire, author of the history of the comparative literature, Abel Francois Weilmann, author of another comparative literature study, and comparative literature must be regarded as the true father of systematically conceived comparative literature in France or anywhere for the matter, and conceivably systematically something that had come into being loosely was not easy matter. While Weilmann Empire didn't write about what could be described in the history of literature, showing patterns of connection and influence. So we have got, in case of French literature, French school of comparative literature, we have got that influence is the best. But here we get the nationalistic transcendence of nationalistic attitude. So one characteristic of comparative literature, we can say that with the study of comparative literature we can overcome the narrowly nationalistic attitude. নিজেদের দেশকে ভালোবাসা, নিজেদের সাহিত্যকে ভালোবাসার যে অ্যাটিটিউড, সেই চুয়াভিনিস্টিক অ্যাটিটিউডকে ওভারকাম করা যায় এই comparative literature study দিয়ে. In Lyon, first school of comparative literature was established. Okay, so Charles Mills Galley taught comparative literature criticism in the University of Michigan in 1887, while the first chair of the subject established in Harvard in 1890. Okay, so comparative literature began to establish internationally in this way. Whenever comparative literature was trying to flourish as a connection of international linkage through literature. What is the linkage? What would be the connection? What would be the similarities? What would be the dissimilarities? What is the difference in patterns? Internationality. Internationally by which way? By on the basis of literature. Hutchison, Macaulay, present. professor of classics and English literature at University College Auckland in New Zealand. We have got another aspect, not Europe. In New Zealand, he said that published a full length of study the subject in comparative literature, and the first set up in 1897, Hugo Melz de Lomnitz, a German-speaking scholar from Cluj in what is now Romania, was a multilingual publication, and he also said about the comparative literature, that is different perspectives. Throughout the 19th century, the use of the term comparative literature was flexible. In this way, the term was এক সময় এটা বলছে আরেক সময় এটা বলছে, so the fluctuation of going forward, that was the perspective of comparative literature, and that can be compared with the self-styled comparatist followed the principles outlined by Humpty Dumpty, who points out that Alice, and when he uses the word, it means just I lose it to mean nearer to the comparative study. Okay, so in such a way comparative literature proceed its journey. Okay, Van Tiggenham arguments against the study of the Middle Ages reverse the earlier view of comparative literature. Okay, so in such a way comparative literature move on. Tiggenham's narrow definition in 1931 continues to affect the understanding of comparative literature. It is worth trying to trace the shift in attitude towards comparative literature and led to Van Tiggenham's bold but a very limiting look. So comparative literature was trying to transcend the nationalistic boundary. সাহিত্য এবং সংস্কৃতির ক্ষেত্রে একটা জাতি যে একটা বাউন্ডারি তৈরি করে দিতে যাচ্ছে, কম্পারেটিভ লিটারেচার এটাকে ব্রেক থ্রু করছে, এবং বিভিন্ন সময় বিভিন্ন স্কলার সেটাকে বলতে চেষ্টা করেছে। এবং ভ্যান টিগেনহামস হোল্ড দ্যাট ইন হুইচ হি সেট ওরাল কালচার, Van Tiggenham said oral culture, folklore and pre-Renaissance literature outside the boundaries of comparative literature. উনি বললেন তাহলে folklore, folktale, these are also the part of literature, isn't it? Oral literature, you know, that means the literature that is composed by none, but it is composed by the oral poets. মানুষের মুখ থেকে যেই কালচারগুলো চলে আসছে সেটাকে বলছি আমরা ওরাল ট্রেডিশন অফ লিটারেচার। তাহলে এই ট্রেডিশনটা কি কোনো দেশের সাহিত্যের অংশ? কোনো কেউ তো লেখে নাই। ভ্যান টিগেনহাম সেড দ্যাট দ্যাট ক্যানট বি দ্য ফোকলোর অলসো, যেটা হলো লোকগাথা যেটা আমরা বলছি মানুষের দেশে, তাহলে ফোকলোর এবং ওরাল ট্রেডিশন দিস ক্যানট বি দ্য পার্ট অফ কম্পারেটিভ লিটারেচার অ্যাকর্ডিং টু ভ্যান টিগেনহাম। ওকে, একদিকে বলছে ন্যাশনাল লিটারেচারকে ফ্লারিশ করছে, আবার বলছে যে টিগেনহাম অ্যাকচুয়ালি সেড দ্যাট this is not a part of comparative literature, that is oral tradition and the folklore. Germany, when readers today considering France and Germany as the twin giants of European economic community could be forgiven for their looking the very different state appears perceived. Okay, France and Germany, they were the economic giants. When your literature and culture and language will be followed by some others country, কখন আপনার দেশের সাহিত্য সংস্কৃতি অন্য দেশের মানুষ শিখবে? Nowadays many people are trying to study Chinese language. Why? Because China, yes, power. What type of power? Economic power, military power and cultural power. Cultural power, in which a cultural power will be consisted of the power of literature and the power of other things. Once upon a time British and America, they had that kind of power. But gradually at present, China were trying to get into the power. What is the power? They have their economic power, and also they are trying to get their every day many students go to China for higher studies, just like America. Age America jeto ekhon kothay jay? China jay. Okay, so at that time Germany and France became the economic power, and they were trying that yes, our literature is best, but that is not. And especially after the fall of Napoleon, France by the mid-19th century was a wealthy power with colonies throughout the world, a strong industrial base and a belief of the superiority of its own language, institution and culture. Okay, especially for the Napoleon. Germany, on the other hand, was the assortment of the little states united by the language striving towards the political states and art. Okay, so in such a word, the comparative literature. So French or English, German, the understanding of the most national characters are our great writers. We establish ourselves only the opposite. Okay, so Malcox praised the achievements of Harder. He said that especially von Tigenheim, who had very defined views on why folklore should not be excluded from the comparative literature. Previously we have said that von Tigenheim said that folklore and oral tradition, they are not the part of oral literature. Why? His argument is that this fairy tale, myth, legend is folklore, not literary history. কারণ এগুলো কেউ লেখে নাই, তাহলে এই দেশ, এটা কোনো দেশ এটাকে ক্লেম করতে পারবে না যে এটা হচ্ছে। আরও একটা কি কারণ? ফর দ্য লেটার ইজ দ্য হিস্ট্রি অফ দ্য হিউম্যান মাইন্ড ভিউড থ্রু দ্য আর্ট অফ রাইটিং in the subdivision of the thematology. However, one consider only the one subject matter, its passage from one country to another, একটা দেশ থেকে আরেকটা দেশে চলে যায়, and its modification whenever a folklore or folktale or a oral tradition will move to other country. একটা দেশের একটা গল্প, and grasshopper, যদিও এটা সমস্যার মম লিখেছেন, এরকম যে ফকটেলের যে গল্প, এই ফকটেলের গল্পগুলো অ্যানোনিমাস রাইটারগুলো লিখছে, এক দেশে চালু আছে, অন্য দেশে গিয়ে আবার এটা একটা মডিফিকেশন হয়ে গেছে। ওকে, এই তাহলে মডিফিকেশন, সো এনি কান্ট্রি কুড নট ক্লেম দ্যাট দিস আর দ্য পার্ট অফ দেয়ার লিটারেচার। কোনো দেশ তাহলে বলতে পারছে না যে এটা আমাদের লিটারেচারের অংশ। ফর দিস আর্ট প্লেস নো পার্ট অফ দিস অ্যানোনিমাস ট্রেডিশন, and whose nature is it to remain impersonal. So what we can compare over there, the concern of comparative literature here there, that means comparative literature can concern the theme of such kind of writing, that can be considered as thematology in comparative literature. Thematology, that means they will be compared with the theme of a folklore or the oral culture in these perspectives. Okay, and how could comparative literature flourish in the country which the place of Shakespeare, Molière, and again even German, they had their literature, and they have the European giant power, so their literature. Here, one person, professor of Indiana University, USA, teaches German and comparative literature there. He said that German comparatists, in some German comparatists, become increasingly chauvinistic. What did I say? Excessive love for own country, that is called chiam. নিজের দেশকে ভালোবাসা হচ্ছে, that is called nationalism. Okay, আর চুয়াভিনিস্ট হলো নিজের দেশকে অতিমাত্রায় ভালোবাসা। সেই অতিমাত্রায় ভালোবাসা কি? নিজের দেশ ছাড়া অন্য দেশের কোনো কিছুই তাদের ভালো লাগবে না। এই যে অ্যাটিটিউড, এটাকে বলা হচ্ছে চুয়াভিনিজম or chauvinistic attitude. So German at that time, Germans, Hitler especially, they had that chauvinistic attitude. So this Ulrich, he criticized that how German language can come in comparative literature. How? Because how could comparative literature flourish in a country in which the plays of Shakespeare, Molière, and Eugene O'Neill were banned from the stage? In case of Germany, at the time of Hitler, the William Shakespeare's drama, Molière, Eugene's drama were not staged. They say that they are the literature of the other system, so they will not be staged in Germany. So that is their attitude. What type of attitude? That means chauvinistic attitude. So their German school of comparative literature cannot have such kind of attitude in comparative literature. That was the definition put by Ulrich Westin. Okay, and this so that was another perspectives of comparative literature. Okay, so D. Lominich, Hungarian scholar and professor, he currently predicted the significance of translation in the development of comparative literature. Previously, gradually they are moving forward. So, transcending nationalistic border, transcending chauvinistic attitude in literature. And here, D. Lominich, he said that translation studies can also be a part of comparative literature. In which way? When translation will be there, that will be translation of a text in different language will usher multilingualism. Multilingualism means whenever, you know, if a great literature is translated in Chinese language, in Hungarian language, in Bulgarian language, that will usher, that means that will focus on multilingualism. Okay, so that kind of, what may be the translational পরে টেক্সটের অবস্থা কি হলো, এটা যেমন একদিকে, আর আরেকটা দিক হলো সেটা হলো মাল্টিলিঙ্গুয়ালিজমের কে এটাকে কি করছে, ইনভাইট করছে। In that case, translation studies can also be a part of comparative literature. That was claimed by D. Lominich. Okay, so in such a way, comparative literature was moving forward. Okay, and the history and the oratory held the first place. Poetry was neglected, yet the century gained in practical activity what is lost in practical idealism. Okay, so in case of Paul van Tigenham, he put another comment, especially Tigenham's comment was debated by René Wellek, American Czech literary critic. It is impossible to draw a line between comparative literature. So many things are there in comparative literature. So René Wellek, he said that if you want to put a line of comparative literature, that is not possible. That means it covers all literature, folklore, thematology, translation studies and others. We haven't talked about gender studies yet. Okay, so that is the situation of translation studies. And so between comparative literature and general literature, between say the influence of Walter Scott in France and the rise of the historical novel, beside the term general literature lends itself into confusion. It has understood to be in literary theory, projects and the principle of literature. Okay, so this way the comparative literature was moving from one part to another part of literary production, language and culture. Okay, here one thing, the study of Beowulf and Paradise Lost be acceptable, because although the former was Anglo-Saxon, that means Beowulf is Anglo-Saxon literature, and technically Anglo-Saxon is an early variant of modern English, so part of the same literary system. Okay, so that can be compared in comparative literature. So comparative literature should study the impact of works by named individual, hence it was the author-centered, and oral literature, anonymous literature, collective of folk literature was outlawed. An enormous amount of time and energy was expended in case of defining the comparative literature. Okay, so in such a way comparative literature was gaining ground, and it covered so many things of literary production. In such a way comparative literature was moving forward. Okay, so this may be the crisis of the comparative literature, but the way we see that in such a way comparative literature was gaining so many perspectives in comparative literature. And another thing we